Oh, we're back for some Bleach Soul Resonance, and I want to take a video to just talk about one of the things I would most like to see going forward with the game, a definitive sort of meditation on a facet of Bleach Soul Resonance that I think is yet completely unexplored. You know, we talk a lot about the criticisms with something like Mirror's High, which even for a CBT just has some glaring issues that maybe it's just a matter of them trying to scale back the CBT so much that they could not put everything that, you know, I would have expected into it. Maybe the game is just in such early development, or maybe it's a Bandai classic and they don't care. But I said in one of the thumbnails, and I did mean this, the game of Mirror's High has great art, but that's about it. I don't think as a Dragon Ball Legends stand-in, it feels particularly strong. The game feel, if you play a fighting game or an arena fighter or any sort of game where you have to fight other people, the feeling of playing that game is very sticky, and I don't mind them being sort of restrictive because that could be a method of the machine, but I don't think the way in which Bleach Mirror's High is sticky is intentional. I think it's just a misstep. So great that they're doing a CBT to sort of iron stuff like that out, but what is that thing for me in Bleach Soul Resonance then, right? You know, Bleach Soul Resonance, a game that I've been enjoying for, you know, well over 6 months at this point. You know, we left the half anniversary and we're into a TYBW collab. We're at least like 8 months into the game existing at this point or something to that effect. I believe in 3 or 4 months we will have the anniversary proper in November or something. So, you know, about a year into the game, and pretty successfully so. What is that thing that I think the game has not taken into account the entire time? The entire time, the game has not actually sort of appeased this condition of mine. And that's team building. Right now, I would say that teams are Mayuri plus 2 bums. That's unfair. I know that's unfair, but look at this list here. I could arguably have this team look like this in my saved list. I could arguably have it look like this. I could, arguably. But I don't, because, you know, I'd rather get Yuset of Urahara somewhere and not always have to rely on Mayuri. So right now, teams are Mayuri plus 2 bumps. That is a big problem for the game. That is a big issue with the game. But even more so than that, the reason that Mayuri continues to be such a sort of like thorn in the side of Bleach Soul Resonance is because he is not synergistically interesting with anyone but Gin. At some point during Mayuri's release, they gave Mayuri something notable, and it was this ultimate leaving behind a corrosive pool for 20 seconds. Now, not only were Gin and Mayuri designed in a lab to make it so that Nellel could have as much on-screen time as possible, thus creating our initial strike team or thrust team, but Mayuri has these pockets of activity that leave him sort of on field and interacting with the pool, with what have you, with Impale in a way that is sort of synergistic. You could see it, right? It becomes very obvious that something is taking place there. Even though there are other great teams and they don't literally revolve around Mayuri's, you know, rotations or ultimate, there aren't other great teams that feel as synergistically sort of deep. They feel mechanically synergistic, but not sort of... I guess one thing that Bleach Soul Resonance doesn't do is fulfill the fantasy. The fantasy of power, right? So what am I talking about? When Ichigo Kurosaki and Kenpachi, or Inohara I should say, are strong together, they aren't fulfilling the fantasy of the ways in which they are strong, right? It's like when you think about Kenpachi, the character you sort of think about is Yachiru, right? Just like, or maybe even you think about, this Ichigo or something like that, right? It's like these are sort of characters that fulfill the fantasy, the canon fantasy of Bleach. This is why I get why I was like, guys, True Shikai Ichigo is going to be thrust. He is not going to be Slash, I think. And people didn't like that. It's because they wanted to fulfill the fantasy of Bleach with something similar to like this. They wanted, consider the Ichigo on the right to be Old Man Zangetsu. They wanted to fulfill that fantasy, right? Right now, while Bleach Soul Resonance has a bunch of fun and great characters, they don't exactly fulfill the fantasy of Bleach's canon. I hope that makes sense to some degree. Because at no point do you look at this team and think, this is Grimmjow's team. This is fulfilling the fantasy of Grimmjow. These are more so just mechanically synergistic units, right? Even to call Mayuri mechanically synergistic also is a bit of a laugh, because Grimmjow is not really mechanically synergistic with Mayuri. He just has the smallest bit of ailment thrown onto his abilities so that he can actually play the game, because Strike didn't have a support. He would have released so fucking bad, right? So it is this like fulfilling of the fantasy that I think is interesting. Like, how should I say this? So this is the team that is probably the most. This is probably the team that is most suitable in its allegiances. We have Aizen, the person who went around, liberating these Hollow, making them into an Ankar and later Espada. We have Zaya Lapido, who is an Espada himself, and we have Okieta, who is an Espada himself. I think the funniest thing about this team is that all three of these characters are sort of rogue entities. I actually don't think that this team fulfills the fantasy of anyone here, really. Okieta, I think it would have been interesting if we're talking like mechanical differences, if Okieta had something where if he was on a team that did not have like a tactic, did not have like a sub DPS, he gained stats or something like that. Just sort of like centering him wholly as the star of the team, right? So if Okieta's team looked more like this or something, he gained like a boost because he wanted to, as this like nihilistic force, he wanted to be the center, the sole participant, right? Okieta never really played nice with anyone in the Espada particularly, right? He had like a brief fascination with like Orihime. Funnily enough, the guy we just got rid of might be the single most suitable character for the canon of him. This character has never worked best with other DPS. Aizen is a solo DPS character. The fantasy of Aizen, him being at the top of the mountain, everyone sort of yielding to his command, him being this strategist, this powerhouse, the fantasy of him is fulfilled in the fact that his best team, if you're talking, team building, the team building that does exist in the game, his best team actually is a double support lineup, particularly when you actually get around to grabbing a fourth boundary with him, right? And it does require boundaries, obviously. It does require boundaries, but I do think that in that way, they do fulfill who Aizen is. They were smart enough to give Aizen his in-world identity through his boundary system. I hope that a little bit of this is making sense. And let's go to a more literal team build, which is, I would love if they lean at some, like after TYBW, after everything, into stuff like this. It doesn't always have to be canon. Rukia and Hitsugaya don't share some big bond, but they are two characters who obviously use, ice and freezing as their mechanic. It would be nice to have a team that synergizes in the most literal sense with an actual like elemental adjacency or what have you. These things that aren't used at all. When this character first came out and we were using Rukia, it was one of the cooler immediate teams because there was an adjacency there that was very obvious, right? It fulfilled the fantasy of Hitsugaya freezing everything, and it also fulfilled the fantasy of Rukia freezing everything, right? These are the reason I'm not like harping on elements too much is because I think that it's not really the point. It's not that every character who has an element needs to team up. It's just that they obviously fulfill like a niche together. Here's another example is Soifon and Yoruichi. These characters were made... Soifon was made with Grimjo in mind. However, Yoruichi just happened to be, and maybe this was actually a planned thing. Maybe this was a very long-term sort of storytelling with these characters. Yoruichi was always the most field-dominant SSR standard character. Soifon acts as a perfect foil to Yoruichi. They canonically have like a master and student relationship, or whatever you want to call it. And watching them sort of zip around together and actually use the field together and ult together and do all these things is very fun. It is a very fun part of their rotations, right? So it didn't really matter that this was happening on the side, or like we were using like this for Soifon. That part doesn't matter because at least two characters sort of fulfill that interesting portion, right? It was sort of like when we had Gin and Tosin together with Rangiku. This folds in on itself. Again, it fulfills the fantasy to me. This is obviously not going to be as important a note for a lot of people, but I don't know, it's cool to me. I like it when I get on Dokkan Battle and I've got future Trunks and future Gohan, and then like they're teamed up with their dads or something like that, or it's like an all future team, or it's an all android team or Majin team or something like that. Like you're sort of seeing these animations coalesce and join together in a way that is very fun because they're also sort of referential, right? And I just think it's a vehicle that's not been explored at all. And I think one of the reasons that I think they should lean into this a bit more, not that they need to, release two characters in a row that relate to each other or anything. Not that there's like a ton of characters in Bleach anyway, so it's not like they can't get around to that. A lot of characters are captains, a lot of the characters are Arankar, a lot of the characters are Quincy, a lot of the, you know what I mean? Like, it's Shinigami, Quincy's, and Arankars. That's like the show. So I know you can call off Fullbringers and stuff, but whatever. Not that they have to release characters in a row in a sequence that all relate to each other or anything. I'm not saying that. But when it comes to kitting these characters onto teams, I think right now we're in a typing meta. And at some point, I would like to see us branch into a synergy meta, a team building meta. That way, when we come back around to like a Tosin character, maybe he gets buffed at some point. Maybe they start doing easy A's or Zenkai Awakening type stuff. We don't always need to see it be like, okay, well, they've Zenkai Awakened free-to-play Tosin, and you're just going to run him like this. Maybe, instead, if the character gets awakened or a character is released, they do something like this character, where there is just such a powerful... I guess would it be Yachiru that I would have to go to? There's such a powerful synergy that goes only for Zaraki Kenpachi that it becomes usual. So maybe like instead having this on a team, even though they're both tactics characters, this character gets a huge amount of supportive strength. Like they literally just change his kit to, instead of using the battlefield skill, and instead of needing, everyone to be the same typing, they instead just go to his kit, and it's like, if you are running Aizen and Gin with this character, you get like more. The wounds actually apply like much more thrust resistance. It doesn't care. You know what I mean? Like, actually, he gives instead of getting crit rate, he gives crit rate. Like, I don't know. There's stuff like that. It's kind of the issue we're having currently with Ichigo and Nellel, where again, not really a team that is, you know, the support doesn't really matter. He's just there to be the strongest support in the game. You know, Mayuri and two bums, but. There's no reason that Nellel's buffs towards Ichigo shouldn't have been more. I don't know if it says it in here or if it's on Trishikai Ichigo, but she gives him a bit of attack, right? I don't remember the exact number. The reality is, like, even if these characters weren't like giving each other damage or like the same typing or what have you, Nellel should always be buffing Ichigo's. I think that's like sort of just a thing that they could sort of start webbing in. It doesn't make teams all samey because you can still run, you know, strong support, strong things like that, but it does allow you more freedom because there's no reason that this team should be so much worse than this. This team right here is so much worse than Kenpachi. And again, people can ask for like Bankai Ichigo buffs, but I think a more appealing thing would just to be giving him team synergistic buffs with inner hollow Ichigo. It should be just that inner hollow Ichigo is so synergistic with Bankai Ichigo that regardless of him getting 5,000% more damage, it's just a matter of them having this passive that links up together. That way it doesn't make this worse. I don't know. Let's say there was like another slash tactics character. It doesn't make this unusable. It just makes this special, right? So yeah, that's my little talk. I think that'd be a cool change. I think teams right now are a little random, and it would be cool to see some amount of, I don't know, consistency between both synergistic kits and also synergistic canon. The synergy between canon is very lacking right now in Bleach Soul Resonance, and when you play an IP gacha, I mean, let's be honest, when you play Daima Goku and Dragon Ball, you know, Dokkan Battle, you want a Daima team, you know, all of these animations sort of coalescing and mixing, and they look very similar, and so it feels like you're actually playing the show. I think it's a part of this game that's sort of missing, you know, is these characters who have real attachment to each other, interacting with each other, regardless of typing. I really don't care that Nellel and Bankai Ichigo are two different typings for two different teams. I don't think it really matters that much because you don't need to make Nellel and Bankai Ichigo the best version of their team, but they should probably have some synergy that is sort of reflective of their, you know, relationship. I just think that's cool. I don't think Orihime should be useless for the entirety of this game. Orihime has no use. She has literally never had a moment in this game where she has been useful. Despite there being several Ichigos. Like, Ichigo is the most prominent character in the game, and they've never had a moment where they could share a team really at all. And I think that just comes down to, why is there no Orihime and Ichigo specific passive? They fucking get married, you know? Like, what the hell? I know they're probably waiting, but I'm gonna say, if they end up going in this direction, where Orihime ends up being the strike support, and she still has no sort of retroactive synergy with an Ichigo, isn't that a little weird? Because she can do both. And it doesn't mean that Bankai Ichigo has to suddenly become the best Slash DPS. Because the best version of Slash can still be Ichigo Inner Hollow and Kenpachi, because she might not be affecting Inner Hollow Ichigo. It makes Slash worse to run her there, but it would be cool if Bankai Ichigo or true, TYBW, Ichigo, or what have you, got anything from an Orihime character. But I digress. Off this little rambling side. This rambling session went a little long. I actually didn't expect it to be like 20 minutes, but I don't know. Tell me what you think. I think not categories, but just more prominent synergies between either aesthetic synergies like ice or elemental, or literal synergies between canon would make the team building component of this game pretty interesting. I mean, right now, like I said, we are completely locked in a Mayuri meta. Arguably, it's Mayuri and 2 bums except the Spirit team. And I promise you, if Mayuri could get on that Spirit team, we'd be using them there too. So, yeah. I've been Load. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the club. We all go make it, and peace.